My husband always switched to Italian when he didn't want me to understand something. I didn't think much of it at first. He grew up in a tight-knit family from a small town outside Naples, and Italian was just home for them, a private language, something warm and familiar that I had no claim to. I told myself that for 26 years. I met him in the fall of 1994. I was working as a school librarian in Dayton, Ohio. 32 years old, recently out of a long relationship that had quietly dissolved the way some things do. Not with a fight, but with a slow mutual fading. I wasn't looking for anyone. I was reorganizing the reference section and learning to be comfortable eating dinner alone. He came into my life through my coworker's birthday party. The kind of gathering you almost don't go to, but then do, because you don't want to seem antisocial. He was standing near the kitchen when I arrived, laughing at something someone had said. He had dark eyes and easy confidence, and when he turned and noticed me, he smiled like he'd been expecting me. His name was Marco. He was an architect. He had come to Ohio for a firm project and hadn't left. He said Dayton surprised him. He said most beautiful things surprise you. I was charmed. I want to be honest about that. He was genuinely charming, and I was 32 and lonely in ways I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. We dated for 2 years. He was attentive, thoughtful, funny. He cooked elaborate Sunday dinners and left notes in my coat pockets and remembered small things I mentioned once and never again. When he proposed on a Tuesday evening in our apartment kitchen, no grand gesture, just him on one knee holding a ring his grandmother had worn, I said yes before he finished the question. His mother flew in from Naples for the wedding. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a black dress and an opinion about everything. She kissed my cheeks and called me Bella, and I thought we were off to a good start. By the end of the weekend, I had the uneasy feeling that she had assessed me the way you assess a house you're not sure you want to buy, noting every flaw, calculating what renovation might cost. But Marco said she was like that with everyone. He said she'd come around. She never came around. Her name was Giuseppina, though everyone called her Pina, and she called her son 3 times a week, and they always spoke in Italian. I would be in the next room folding laundry or making tea, and I'd hear Marco's voice drop low and warm, the way it only did when he talked to her, and I understood nothing except my own name occasionally surfacing like something caught in a net, Kathleen, and then more Italian, and then his quiet laugh. I asked him once, early on, what they talked about for so long. He said, "You know how mothers are. She worries." I reassure her. I accepted that. I accepted a lot of things early on because I wanted to believe the story I'd chosen, that he was good, that we were good, that the Italian was just a warm family habit and not something pointed at me. The first years were genuinely fine. We bought a house in a quiet part of Kettering. I continued at the library. He built his reputation at the firm and eventually started his own small practice. We had our daughter, Abby, in 1999 and our son, Owen. But wait, Owen is on the list. Our son, I'll call him by what we called him at home, Benny, short for Benjamin, in 2001. Children have a way of filling the spaces in a marriage. The quiet tensions, the unasked questions, children cover them like furniture covers old floors. You stop noticing what's underneath. I noticed other things instead. I noticed that Marco handled all the finances, not because I'd asked him to, not because we'd discussed it, but because it had simply happened the way certain arrangements happen in a marriage. Gradually, without ceremony, until one day it's just the way things are. He paid the bills. He managed our one joint account. When I needed money for groceries or the kids' school supplies, I asked. When I wanted to buy my mother a birthday gift, I asked. When the transmission on my car needed replacing, I told him and he handled it. I was 53 years old before I had my own bank account. That's the sentence I have the hardest time saying out loud. Not because I'm ashamed, exactly, but because I know how it sounds. How could a grown woman, a librarian, an educated person, let that happen? And the answer is that it happened so slowly that I didn't see it as something happening to me. I saw it as Marco being responsible. Marco being the provider. Marco taking care of things so I didn't have to worry. He was good at framing it that way. when I mentioned around 2007 that I'd like to have my own account. Just something small, something mine. He got very quiet and then asked me calmly if I didn't trust him. He wasn't angry, he was hurt. And somehow I found myself apologizing, reassuring him, dropping the subject. That happened more than once over the years, with more than just the money. A certain quietness that wasn't quite silence, a certain look that wasn't quite a threat, and suddenly I was the one explaining myself. His mother visited twice a year. Every visit, she and Marco would sit at the kitchen table after dinner and talk for hours in Italian. My children grew up hearing it. Abby even picked up a little. She took a semester in college, mostly to understand her grandmother. But I sat in the living room and watched television or read and told myself this was normal. Extended family dynamics. Cultural difference. It wasn't about me. Except sometimes it clearly was about me. I'd come into the kitchen for a glass of water and the conversation would pause. Not obviously, not rudely, just a half-second hesitation and then continue. Marco would glance at me and smile, and I'd smile back and fill my glass and leave. And I would tell myself I was being paranoid. I was a 57-year-old woman with paranoid tendencies and too much time in her own head. The Italian lessons started almost by accident. I had a patron at the library, a retired professor, a kind man named Dr. Ashworth, who came in every Tuesday to use the large print resources for his eyes and to talk to whoever was willing. He'd spent 30 years teaching Romance languages at the university and spoke 6 languages with what he described as varying degrees of embarrassment. He thought this was hilarious. I thought it was wonderful. One Tuesday in the spring of 2019, he asked me if I spoke any language other than English. I said I'd taken French in high school, remembered almost nothing. He said French and Italian are close cousins. Anyone with French in their background could pick up Italian faster than they'd expect. He offered casually, not making a thing of it, to lend me his old Pimsleur audio set and some workbooks he'd used with students. I took them home. I'm not entirely sure why. I think I told myself it was just mental exercise, something to do. A hobby, like the women in those magazines who take up watercolor at 60. I kept the workbooks in my car. I listened to the audio during my commute. I practiced in the shower quietly, where no one could hear me being wrong about things. I was slow, and then less slow. I had Dr. Ashworth's patient guidance every Tuesday, and I am not someone who gives up on things I've started. I told no one. Not Abby, not my sister, not the friends I had lunch with on Saturdays, and certainly not Marco. I'm not sure when I made the decision to keep it a secret. I don't think it was one moment. I think it was more that I kept waiting for the right time to mention it, and the right time never came, and then enough time had passed that telling him felt like it would require explaining why I hadn't told him sooner. So, I said nothing. I let him continue to believe that Italian was a closed door. It took about 18 months before I understood enough to follow a full conversation. Not perfectly. There were still words I missed, idioms that confused me. But by late 2020, sitting in my kitchen while Pina visited and she and Marco sat at the table after dinner, I understood what they were saying. I wish I could tell you it was just gossip. Normal mother-son talk, harmless. It wasn't. The first evening I truly understood they were talking about money. Not in any particularly heated way. Pina was asking about their finances, the way she always did, the way I'd assumed was ordinary concern. Marco was telling her that everything was comfortable, that the house was almost paid off, that his practice was doing well. And then Pina said, in Italian, "And what about her? Does she know how much there is?" Marco said no, she doesn't ask and I don't tell. It's easier that way. I was standing at the kitchen sink with my back to them, rinsing a coffee cup. My hands kept moving, the water kept running. I didn't turn around. Pina said, "Good, she'd spend it all. You know what she's like." Marco laughed. It was a short laugh, not unkind exactly, but intimate. The laugh of someone agreeing with something too obvious to argue. I turned the faucet off. I dried my hands on the dish towel, very slowly and carefully, because if I didn't hold on to something, I thought I might just float away from myself. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch and stared at the television, which was off, and I did not cry. I wanted to, and I didn't. I kept coming back to that laugh, not the words, as awful as they were, the laugh, the ease of it, the way it assumed I would never know. I kept going to the library every day. I kept listening to Dr. Ashworth and practicing my Italian, and I let another 6 months go by. In that time, I heard more. Not everything. I couldn't always position myself close enough, and there were visits when Pina was in a better mood and the conversations were genuinely ordinary. But there were other evenings, other windows. I heard Pina tell Marco that I had gotten old, that I had let myself go. Marco said, "She's 60," and Pina said, "I looked better at 60," and Marco said nothing, which is its own kind of answer. I heard them discuss Abby, my daughter, in terms that made me grip the edge of the sink so hard I left marks in the wood. I heard Marco tell his mother that he had protected the house in a way that would make things simple if anything changed. He used the word for uncomplicated, clean. When I looked up what he had actually done, which took several months and 2 consultations with a legal aid clinic I found in secret, I understood that he had structured things so that if we divorced, I would have very little to claim. I want to be precise here because I spent a long time being imprecise about this in my own mind, softening it with words like different approach to finances and his family's customs and just how he was raised. The precise word is control. The other precise word is deliberate. I started making my own preparations. I was 60 years old, and I had worked for 34 years as a librarian, and I had approximately nothing in my name. No savings account, no retirement account, no assets I could point to as mine. That is what I discovered when I sat down and looked at it clearly, which I had not let myself do for a very long time. My salary had always gone to the joint account. I had never questioned it because Marco had said it made more sense to pool everything. I had believed that pooling meant equally. I understand now that pooling can mean something else entirely when one person controls the pool. I opened my own savings account at a credit union across town, one I had never used with Marco. I directed a small portion of my paycheck there, small enough not to disturb the balance he monitored, and I let it accumulate. I found a financial counselor through a women's resource center in Dayton. I told her my situation. She was not surprised. She had heard versions of this many times. She helped me understand what I had rights to, what a court would and wouldn't see, what steps I could take. I contacted a family law attorney. Her name doesn't matter here, but she was patient and thorough, and she did not make me feel foolish for having waited so long to look. I am not going to tell you that what came next was clean or easy, or that I feel nothing complicated about it. I was with this man for 26 years. I built a life with him. Our children are good people who love both of us and will be navigating the debris of this for the rest of their lives, even if they never fully see what happened. You don't dissolve a marriage without grieving it, even a marriage that was doing you harm, maybe especially a marriage that was doing you harm, because with that kind you're grieving twice, once for what ended and once for what you now understand it was. I told Marco on a Sunday in March 2023. He came home from his golf game, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of me. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say. I said I wanted a divorce, that I had retained an attorney, that she would be in contact with him. I kept it short because I had learned in 26 years that longer conversations gave him room to maneuver. He stared at me for a long time, then he asked what I thought I was going to do. He said it the way you might ask someone where they think they're going in a building they don't have a key to. He meant it as a reminder that he held the keys. I told him, in English, what I had put in order over the previous 2 years. The account, the counsel, the documentation. And then I told him, in Italian, that I had learned to speak his language. I said it carefully, the way Dr. Ashworth had taught me. Not perfectly, but clearly. The look on his face was something I will carry for the rest of my life. Not the look I expected, not anger or embarrassment. It was something closer to recalibration. Like a machine trying to accommodate a variable it hadn't been built to process. He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then he said in English, very quietly, "How long?" "Long enough," I said. The divorce was finalized 14 months later. It was not easy, and it was not clean, and the legal fees were painful, and there were nights in the middle of it when I lay awake at 4 in the morning and thought, "This is too hard. I am too old for this. I should have stayed." I want to say that, honestly, because if you're sitting somewhere right now thinking your situation is too complicated or too late or too far gone, I want you to know that I had those nights and I came through them. I am 63 years old. I live in a small house in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which is nothing like what I'm used to, but which is entirely mine. The lease is in my name, the utility accounts are in my name, the car is in my name. I started a retirement account at 59. It's not where it would be if I'd started at 35, but it exists and it grows and it is mine. Abby calls me twice a week. She was angry for a while, not at me or not only at me, but at the whole shape of it, the waste of it, the years. She's coming around to something more complicated than anger, which I think is healthier. Benny took it harder. He's still finding his way through. I try to be patient. I still work at the library. I still see Dr. Ashworth on Tuesdays. He knows what happened, in broad strokes, because he could see the change in me. He didn't make a fuss over it. He just told me that his wife had once said that language learning is an act of courage. It requires you to be wrong in front of people, to be a beginner, to ask for help understanding things. He thought she was right. I think so too. I used to lie awake at night and try to identify the moment I should have seen it clearly. The moment when I should have known and didn't. I've stopped doing that. It doesn't lead anywhere useful, and it assumes that knowing earlier would have made leaving easier, which is not necessarily true. I wasn't ready before I was ready. I made my preparations when I was able to make them. That's the only version of this story I have. What I know is this: I spent 26 years in a house that had doors I was not supposed to find, in conversations I was not supposed to understand, in a financial arrangement I was not supposed to question. And somewhere in my 6th decade of life, I learned a language that was being used against me, and I walked out of the cage on my own terms. Not because I was brave, exactly. I'm not sure bravery is the right word for something you do while terrified, while uncertain, while eating cereal alone at 7 in the morning and asking yourself what on earth you think you're doing. I did it because staying had become a thing I could no longer choose without knowing I was choosing it. And once I knew that, really knew it, not just suspected it, staying was no longer possible. That's all it was. And that was enough.